under one roof and let them duke it out and find out exactly what they think about ADF past, present, and future. And so we thought we would ask Isaac Bonowitz, the founder of ADF, to start us off, to talk about his original vision, if he still remembers it, and to talk about what, maybe if you could go back in time and talk about what it was like from that perspective for a few minutes, and what you were thinking and feeling about starting it up. And then tell us fairly briefly about the evolution over the next years until Fox took over. And if you want to talk about why that transition happened, fine. If not, anything you want to do. After Isaac winds down, if the sun is still up, we're going to ask our other honored Archdruids, our first elected Archdruid, Fox, to comment on this, maybe talk about commentary. Some of it will overlap. I'm sure you were involved in ADF for quite a bit of the time that he will be talking about, and you can give color commentary or question or call him a bald-faced liar, whatever you want. And also, our current elected Archdruid, Skip Ellison, can do the same thing. After they have pummeled Isaac into nonsense something, then we will ask Fox to do the same thing. And he can talk about his years as Archdruid and what he saw as the vision and how that evolved and what was going on. And then the other two can take swings at him. And then it'll all end up in Skip's lovely lap, where he can talk about his realm. And any of you guys that want to take that into the future, you know, no holds barred, whatever you want to do. That sound like a fair...
Sure, it might be a little more freeform than that.
Oh yeah, yeah, but just as a basic thing, in case you'd like, what do we talk about next? You can fall back on that. But if you want to talk about...
He's a bard. We have to preserve the illusion, making us in control.
Exactly, exactly. And you notice that the bard gets to speak before the kings.
This is true.
As it should be. And so now I'll shut up and let Archdruid Emeritus, Isaac P.U. Bonowitz.
How many years have you been a member?
And I've been saying
bones.
Yeah. I don't know why I want to keep giving you the bone.
You're not even my type. Okay, hopefully some of this can be edited out. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. ADF is in many ways an evolution out of an older druidical group called the Reformed Druids of North America. The Reformed Druids of North America, or the RDNA, was founded at Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota, back in 1963 of the Common Era, originally as a tongue-in-cheek protest against coerced chapel attendance. All the students were required to go to the church of their choice once a week, whether they wanted to or not. At least 10 Sundays per semester, or something on that order. And one group of students said, you know, we hate this. We don't really want to have to do this. And then one of the members said, you know, I never mentioned this before, but my family have been Druids for generations. And they said, that sounds cool. And they said, why don't we start a Druid Grove on campus? And that way, either they'll give us credit for going to chapel, in which case we will have really made fun of the entire requirement, or they'll refuse, in which case we can stage a student protest on the grounds of religious discrimination against Druids. They figured it was a win-win either way. So they proceeded to do that, and skipping over an enormous amount of history, they succeeded in their original goal, which was to make the college drop the requirement. They started gathering on a hilltop on the campus in the Arboretum, doing invocations to the Earth Mother and various Celtic deities from different pantheons, and doing meditation and passing a chalice of the waters of life, otherwise known as Nawishkibia, or whiskey, made their ceremonies very popular on campus. And when they came back the next fall, lo and behold, the requirement was no longer in the student handbook. And the Archdruid of the Grove, that's what he called himself, David Fisher, gathered everyone around and said, congratulations, We succeeded. We've won. We don't have to keep doing these silly rituals anymore. And one of the other druids said, but wait a minute, Samhain is coming up, and that's my favorite holiday. So to the surprise and the eventual horror of the founder of the Reformed Druids of North America, who is now an extremely embarrassed Anglican priest, the Reformed Druids of North America kept going. One of the graduates from that school was a man named Robert Larson, who became my roommate when I was in college at the University of California, Berkeley, back in the late 60s. And he mentioned Druidism to me at one point, and I said, that sounds really interesting. I'd already known about the Church of All Worlds and the Church of the Eternal Source and the various different flavors of Wicca running around, the overall neo-pagan movement. I was familiar with it. None of it had ever really grabbed me particularly, but when he said the word Druid, you know, oak leaves went off in my head. And I said, wow, that sounds great. And he said, well, all right, you want to see a Druid ritual? I said, sure. And the next thing you know, we had a Druid grove in Berkeley. And in October of 1969, I was ordained as a priest in the Reformed Druids of North America. And that started me pretty much on the path that I've been on ever since, of having Druidism be my primary pagan path. Although I am perfectly happy to worship a lot of other gods and goddesses from various and sundry pantheons, especially if they give good ritual. But by and large, the Druidism in general, and for me, the Irish pantheon of deities in particular, have always been, you know, my favorites. Well, I moved across country several times for different jobs and started different offshoots of the Reformed Druids of North America, mostly because the RDNA didn't think it was a religion. They thought they were a philosophy that was applicable to any religion. Now, in this, they had a great deal in common with the fraternal Druid orders of the British Isles and of Europe, which basically grew out of Freemasonry and also claimed that they weren't a religion, they were a philosophy. Well, I saw Druidism as a religion and started evolving and changing the rituals and the liturgy and the training and so forth. Eventually, I went back to Berkeley, ran for Archdruid of the local Berkeley Grove on a I'm going to change everything ticket. Won, and therefore became the new Archdruid in Berkeley. This was, I think, in the late 70s. And started making it all a great deal more serious. And with my brilliant interpersonal skills and my deep knowledge and awareness of small group dynamics, the group blew up in about a year. And I said, to heck with this. Gave away 3/4 of my magical library and bought books on a different arcane black art, computer programming.
If I could interject one thing,
Yes.
I've received one when I started working with Isaac. I've received volumes of material from RDNA and from early ADF years, and I've read through a lot of that. And the character of RDNA, for those who are not familiar with it, at least part of what I got is it certainly had an element of lampooning involved in it, a lot of humor, a lot of silliness.
We tried very hard not
Right.
to take ourselves too serious.
Right, and so that's the current humor working, you know, trying to change.
Trying to swim against.
Yeah.
Yes. And as usual, I lost complete track of where
My
was
fault.
that?
Sorry.
Okay, yes,
Computer programming.
Right. I got into computer programming and eventually desktop publishing, and actually managed to earn a living for about 10 years, which was nice because earning a living as a pagan author is not particularly lucrative, if any of you were unaware of that. Eventually, I wound up living in New York City, and I was missing the Druid rituals. That had become a part of my personal spiritual path, and I was going out in the woods and doing them all by myself, but it wasn't anywhere near as much fun. And I met a young man from Oklahoma who said he was a pagan, and I met him at the Irish Arts Center in New York City, where we were both taking a class in conversational Irish. And we got in the habit, once I noticed him wearing a pentacle and he noticed me wearing one, we started talking about paganism in general, and we got in the habit of stopping off at a pub after class every week. And then one evening after, I guess it must have been the fourth Guinness, I said the fateful words, "You know, I never mentioned this before, but I've been a Druid for years." And he said, "Oh, tell me more." And the next thing I know, he's trying to persuade me that we should start a new Druid organization. I said, "You know, I'm tired of people accusing me of hijacking their religions. I don't want to do that again." He said, "But yeah, wouldn't it be nice if we just had one pagan group in North America that actually did decent research, that bothered to, you know, learn the skills that pagan clergy had in the old days?" And I said, "Yeah, that would be nice, but I don't want to start another religion." And he said, "Okay, why don't we start a little publication, a zine?" And I said, "Okay, that I could handle." Now, for those who are not part of science fiction fandom, a zine is part of what's called an amateur press association, where you get a bunch of people who are fans of a particular topic or a particular genre or a particular author, and they write their own magazines, basically. Everybody contributes a few pages. They're all Xeroxed off or mimeographed in the old days, those of you old enough to remember mimeographs, and collated and sent out to everybody who contributed. So I said, here's what we'll do. We'll start an APA, we'll call it the Druid's Progress, which was a play on the old book Pilgrim's Progress, which nobody under 30 has ever read. And I said, you know, I know a dozen or so people in the pagan community who are serious about research and scholarship. So let's just, you know, start putting our heads together. Now, this was at about the same time I remembered some stuff that one of my older Irish teachers, Dr. Jim Duran, had told me, which was that there was now, you know, as of the 70s and the 80s, there was now enough scholarly material between the work being done by the Dumazilian School of Comparative Mythology, newer translations of the Carmina Gadelica, folklore studies being done by other people, new archaeological research, that he believed it would be possible to reconstruct 70 or 80% of what Paleo-Pagan Druidism had really been. That we'd be able to figure out what it was they were really doing way back when. So we took that as one of our goals. We were going to try to do that job of reconstructing what Paleo-Pagan Druidism really had been way back when, and adapting it to the needs of people living in the 20th and now the 21st century of the common era. For example, we all know about all the human sacrifice. Well, maybe there wasn't as much of it done as some scholars would have us believe, but they did some of it, and that tends to be very messy. You know, and sacrificing bulls and all that sort of thing. It's really hard to get blood out of Irish lineage. Any of you have ever tried to do that, you'll know. At least the ladies will. So we said we're going to adapt this to the needs of modern people. So after a couple of issues, people started saying, well, all this research is nice, but wouldn't it be nice if we also had some rituals? And I said, okay. And I started putting together what I knew about Celtic ritual, which wasn't very much, because there isn't very much known about ancient Celtic ritual, with what I knew about basic principles of ritual design, and taking off from the beginning patterns that I had learned in the Reformed Druids of North America, which were themselves rooted in classic Christian ritual. And sorting through all of that, I produced what I suggested would be a standard ritual design that we could all try working with. Just an outline, and each group would add different things to it. One of the things I did in the earliest version of the ritual that I wrote was I tried to make as much of it bilingual as possible. I had half of it in Irish and the other half in English. That's another issue we'll get to talking about at some point, I'm sure. I believe that all of our people should be bilingual, but that's too much work, so nobody really wanted to do that much. In any event, so we came up with a standard design for a ritual, and people started getting together in their local communities and inviting friends over and doing Druid rituals. And the next thing you know, people wanted an actual organization. They wanted a legal structure. So I put together a nonprofit religious association, and ADF became a legal entity, I think around 1987 or thereabouts.
April 1st, 87 for the Articles of Association.
So April 1st, we got April Fool's Day, yes. So we became a legal entity at that point. And then, of course, people wanted a study program. And all this time, you know, I was saying, let's keep it simple. Let's not get carried away. I don't really want to have another organization. And I wound up with another organization. Well, I did my best to write the original Articles of Incorporation and of Association and the later Articles of Incorporation to try to tone down the kind of rampant small group politics that I had seen destroy so many other pagan groups. Because I've been watching Tim/Otter/Oberon Zell from the Church of All Worlds and Harold Moss from the Church of the Eternal Source and other old friends start organizations, get them going really well, and then have them yanked out from underneath them and taken off in directions they had no intentions of it ever going. So I simply decided that rather than being an elected Archdruid, I was going to select myself as Archdruid for life. Or at least until a point where I got too damn tired. And so I was Archdruid for 13 years. That's the longest term of office that I hope any future Archdruid will ever have.
And that's going to be the case because we've limited it now to 9 years maximum.
Exactly. It's now limited. In any event, but I said, you know, I'm the Archdruid for life. They cannot change the bylaws. They cannot yank this off in a direction I don't like. And I felt that that was necessary for at least the beginning years of the organization. And ADF kept growing. We put together a study program, which, as we will discuss in their two portions of this historical material, was torn apart, thrown out the window, and a new one was put together, which was torn apart and thrown out the window, and then a new one was put together. Are we on the third or the fourth version
we're on
now?
the third, and we keep revising slowly as we get feedback from
Oh,
students that have gone.
We're Druids. Of course, the third version would be the right one.
Yeah.
So, the next thing I knew, ADF had turned into a national organization. We had some 20 or 30 groves scattered across the United States, with a few in Canada. And we were annoying the hell out of all the other neo-pagan groups in the country. For one thing, because we published our first study program. And we put it in print, and we sent copies to about 100 different pagan publications, saying, here, review this. Maybe some of your readers will be interested in what we're doing. And what we got was an enormous amount of yelling and screaming from other pagan organizations. How dare you have a study program in which you publish what people are supposed to know? It's all supposed to be secret. If you don't keep it secret, how will you keep the bullshit artists out? And we said, yes. That was the point. The idea was to have publicly accessible, widely distributed standards of qualification for our leadership. And I believe we were the first modern pagan group to do that, and other groups have subsequently followed our pattern and have done the same thing, and that's been a good thing for the pagan movement as a whole. But the theory was supposed to be that if somebody showed up in your town claiming to be a hotshot, high-ranking member of ADF, that anybody there, including somebody who'd maybe been a member for a year or two, could say, oh wow, that's great, because our grove herbalist broke her ankle and she's supposed to do an herb walk tomorrow morning, and of course you can do that, right? Or, gee, are we glad to see you? The bard came down with laryngitis. We're doing Samhain ritual on Friday night. Naturally, you know all the music, right? And we figured in this way that we would have a smaller percentage of people faking their way through what they were doing. And indeed, it's worked out that way. We have attracted an enormous body of very knowledgeable, very talented people. And we have created a complete culture. People in business talk about corporate culture, the culture of the body of the membership as a whole of various organizations. We've done that. We've created a corporate culture of really fine people. And now we're up to what, 80 groves or something like that?
We're at 60 groves as of last week, and proto groves we went from a low of 7 members in 1984 when the membership data starts to 1,169 as of last week. So we've grown a little,
Yeah, 1,100. Okay.
almost full.
Yeah. I don't know what else to rave about at this particular point. In 1989, I was one of several thousand people who got chemically contaminated L-tryptophan powder, which did very unfortunate and unpleasant things to my health. And by the end of 1995, I was semi-crippled, and I was finding the stress of being the Archdruid, in addition to everything else that was going on in my life, just too much. I resigned as Archdruid as of January 1st of 96.
And almost gave Ian a heart attack.
And almost gave Ian a heart attack. The one person who would be sitting here with us if he were here was the interim Archdruid, Ian Corrigan. Is he still chief liturgist?
No.
Certainly one of our most upstanding and creative liturgists in the organization. And he
And
was
he
the
ended
vice
up-
Archdruid at the time I resigned.
He is
Right, that's the
half
last
of the
I remember.
Bard Laureate.
He's half the
Half
Bard
the Bard's
Laureate.
Laureate
Yes.
every year.
Ian held the office of Archdruid for 6 months while he arranged for our first Archdruidical elections. Now, I had set the bylaws up at that point so that the Archdruids would be elected for 9 years at a time. Fox will tell us what a great idea that was.
Before Fox jumps
Yes.
in, I want to make sure that you covered what your original vision was.
Ah, that,
Well,
Going
but you don't
in.
want to go critiquing into the future because we haven't talked about
But
it.
not to the
Yeah.
future, but just to like maybe the point where you stepped down. How do you? What was your vision, and how was that progressing?
Can we have the paperwork that you've got over on the end of the table with the original article that appeared in DP number 1 so that
the
Isaac can
senile
refer
old
back
man
to his
has
notes.
his notes. Yes.
And while you're getting that, I want to build on one thing that you said. You were talking about how a person in ADF could go any place and know what was going to happen. We've got to the point now where we can go to a festival and just, we all know the core order of ritual. We can just come together and tell someone, you're going to talk and you're going to call upon the ancestors, and everybody will know what to do. And the ritual will go together and look as though it's been done 100 times.
Except
Because
for
we have
Fall
those
Fest.
practiced people.
Yeah, except for Fall Fest,
Except
because
for Fall Fest, which
because
is
we
unique.
like to innovate.
Yes.
That's
have
one
to do
term
it
for it.
different.
And we'll have a lively discussion about that later.
Right over the, yes, tonight around the fire.
Tonight around the fire. Okay. I'm not sure how much of this I have to look at.
Highlighted things are good.
My original vision was to have a neo-pagan religious order of people who were committed to excellence. The original Druids were the artists and intellectuals of their peoples. And I knew that the pagan movement as a whole was desperately in need of artists and intellectuals, and desperately in need of people who had done some serious training, both in terms of scholarship, in terms of performance arts, in terms of counseling, in terms of all the different things that clergy were supposed to be able to do in the mainstream religions. I thought we should be able to have our clergy be able to stand up on a dais with clergy from a dozen other mainstream religions and interact with them as an equal. We're still a little bit far away from that, but we're pretty darn close now. I think that the people who are fully ordained priests now can hold their own with your average Protestant minister or Jewish rabbi, etc., at least in terms of explaining who we are and what we do and what our theology is and so on and so forth. I saw ADF as something that could plant seeds that would grow into, one, a healthy revival of neo-pagan Druidism, that we could take the best of the old ways and adapt them to modern times, and that by doing so, we could be an example to other pagan groups, so that they could begin to get their act together. Now, this sounds awfully arrogant on my part. It was. But in point of fact, most of the other pagan groups in the United States, and I'd have to say the English-speaking world at that time, were extremely disorganized. Most of them were working on secrets or mysteries focus for their training and their practice, so that you could never tell whether or not the person who was claiming to have particular skills actually had them until you subjected yourself to their tender mercies. And you found out whether they were any good at doing ritual or not. Or whether or not the herbalism they gave you got you better or poisoned you. I thought it'd be real nice if our herbalists actually studied botany and could identify plants in the wild and knew how to make a tincture and had the basic knowledge that someone who would call himself an herbalist in the outer world would have. So that was a large part of the dream, was to have a modern druid class, if you will, of people who knew what the heck they were doing, who could use their knowledge and their creative skills for the benefit of their communities. Now, mind you, this doesn't mean I expected ADF to take over the world. That's at least 75, 80 years down on my 100-year plan. But nowhere near there yet.
150.
But I really felt it was important that we do the best we could.
21st century.
One of the reasons I thought it was important was because I thought I looked at the shape the planet was in the late 70s and the early 80s and knew that the Earth Mother was in serious difficulty. That was the primary reason why I made the Earth Mother an important figure at the beginning of every ADF ritual. Now, I tend to think of her in terms of Gaia as being the living biosphere of planet Earth, but I felt if there was any group in the environmental movement who were appropriate to be chaplains, it would be the Druids. Certainly the clergy of the mainstream religions are in no fit position historically or theologically to be particularly environmental, at least not as they've practiced for the last 1,000 years or so. They're part of the reason the planet, the biosphere is in such wretched shape. So I thought that environmental activism was something that was really important, that if we're going to call ourselves Druids, we ought to do more than go out in the woods once a month or once a week and then go back home and turn on the TV. That we ought to actually be taking social and political and environmental action to improve the world, rather than just sitting on our hands and letting it all go by without us. So I had my own environmental and progressive / liberal social and political ideas that I thought should be part of what Druidism was. Now, I've been disappointed in terms of politics, because we do have a strong streak of libertarian / anarchist / right-wing, pry my gun for my cold dead fingers members in ADF, just like we do in every other religion. But by and large, there's a reason why most intellectuals are left-wing. And I expected that a religion that was composed in large part of intellectuals would have liberal and progressive attitudes. Now, that doesn't mean we've ever told people who to vote for, because we don't want to lose our 501c3 status. That would be illegal. But we do encourage people to talk about and discuss and debate all sorts of political issues, as well as social issues, sexual issues, artistic issues, scholarly issues, etc. And any of you who have ever logged on to any of the ADF mailing lists, of which there are 247, I believe,
No, nowhere's near that many.
will note that we're not exactly shy about sharing our opinions, whether online or in person. So that's a large part of what my vision was. I wanted us to take the best scholarly information, combine it with the best artistic skills, direct it to the best spiritual and social and environmental actions that we could. This is why I came up with the motto for the organization, Why Not Excellence? Okay. Over the course of 13 years, I found out that the reason why not excellence was, it's too much work! But nonetheless, we also came up with the unofficial motto of ADF, which I'm sure the old folks here know, as fast as a speeding oak. And we have indeed been making progress as fast as a speeding oak. If you look historically on the website, and you look at some of the graphic arts from the very beginning, the logo for ADF was a little sapling with just 5 oak leaves on it. And then in the late 90s, I think it was, I came up with a secondary version of it that had the sapling is now a much larger bush with 27 leaves on it.
This was the
This
second
one,
version.
right, this is the one that we have currently the most t-shirts of.
Yes.
I have recently made a still larger version of the logo. Well, we have a full-grown tree and acorns dropping on fertile land. And 20 years from now, we'll make the logo again, and there'll be little saplings growing all around us. There's a difference between a church and a grove. You wanted me to talk for 2 hours. There's a difference between a church and a grove that I think is relative to what we do. And I'm going to tell this real fast, okay? How do you make a church or a temple or a mosque? Well, first you scrape the ground of all topsoil and dirt till you have dead rock. And then you take a bunch of stones or a bunch of dead trees and you cobble together a building. And then as soon as you finish this beautiful building, it starts falling apart. So you have to spend a lot of time repairing it. And then you get into lots of big arguments about whether it should be, repaired exactly the way it originally was, or whether you need to add another wing onto it. Causes lots of difficulties, tends to make the church doesn't grow. It just sits there as a building and falls apart. A grove, on the other hand, is what you get when a tree has grown successfully for many years and it's put out seedlings in all directions around it. And eventually, the tree dies. And its rotting corpse, the log that all of the bugs and the chipmunks and the squirrels and the other critters are living in and living on, disintegrates to produce fertile soil for all the little trees that are now growing around that original tree. And eventually, even after that central tree is completely gone, you have something that's alive. And it grows, and it matures, and it dies, and its offspring continue. That is what I see ADF as being something that it can do. That we are putting off seed in all directions, whether we realize it or not. We've had lots of schisms, which I think is a great sign of success. And more people using our material, stealing it actually is the technical term, and putting their own names on it, but that's okay, because these are the seedlings, the little mutants that are appearing, in the general vicinity of the main tree. And eventually ADF will mutate or dissolve, and there will be, scores, if not hundreds of other trees growing where the ADF tree was. And we will have done something to repair the damage previously done to the forest. End of my sermon. Now, everyone,
You don't
turn
see
your
us as
hymn
the
books.
Catholic Church in the future?
No.
Where ADF is the overarching grove that's overshadowing all these little congregations?
No, I see us more as the ringmasters in a large circus with a lot of circles. Lots of rings. No, the Catholic Church was built on the Roman imperial pattern, okay, and very heavily top down, and did its best to prevent growth and evolution and change in the outskirts. I think that is unhealthy. I don't think living things naturally grow in that particular way, and that if we want ADF to continue to grow and to be healthy, that we have to think of ourselves as gardeners rather than as, plumbers and carpenters. That we're trying to help something natural grow.
An organic organization that grows from the bottom up.
Yes. One of the major things I did early on in ADF, how many people here have been around long enough to remember how many years I kept whining about when are we going to have a brewers guild? Almost from the beginning. Okay. I wanted guilds. I wanted SIGs, special interest groups. And here's why. Robert Anton Wilson, an old friend of mine and who has now passed away, wrote in some of his books about something he called the snafu principle, taken from military experience. Situation normal, all fouled up. Use the F word of your choice in that sentence. Efficient communication between members of a vertical hierarchy is impossible. Why? Because the people in the middle will censor the information coming from the top down and from the bottom up. So this is why the CEO of a company generally doesn't have the slightest idea what's going on down on the factory floor. And the people who are down on the factory floor have no idea what the general goal and direction of the organization is supposed to be. Because you have all these people in middle management for their own good censoring the information in both directions, or at least they think for their own good. Horizontal communication, on the other hand, is fairly efficient. You all know the people in your bowling team, and you all know the people who work in your office, and you all know the people who you interact with on a day-in, day-out basis. Communication among equals is relatively open and efficient. But if you have a large organization that does have multiple levels of complexity to it, what you need is diagonal communication. And I specifically stole this idea from the Society for Creative Anachronism, of which I was an early member. If you have a calligrapher's guild, okay, and in the calligrapher's guild you have a member of the Mother Grove, and you have a couple of senior druids, and you have a half a dozen people who belong to local groves, and you have a dozen solitaries, and they're all communicating regularly as members of the calligrapher's guild. And then you have a bunch of other guilds and a bunch of other special interest works. What you get is a spaghetti bowl of communication. Now, that's not always the most efficient way to communicate, but it is the hardest to censor. And censorship of internal communication is one of the 7 deadly warning signs of fossilization in organizations. So, I said from the beginning, let's start having all of these different things so that people in different parts of the country will be communicating with each other regularly, and people at different levels of the hierarchy will be communicating regularly. And in this way, it will be really hard for any one small group to pull a coup d'etat, or for us to suddenly turn on the television news one morning and find out one of our groves just did a public human sacrifice, or something else horrible happening that we had no idea was on the horizon. Okay? Gossip is good. Gossip has a positive social value, or it can have a positive social value. Okay? As long as we all try to keep a sense of humor about it and not be vicious about it, gossip can be something that's useful to keep an organization healthy and organic. So, I'm running out of stuff to say at this point. So did you have any comments, catcalls, etc.?
Yeah, me in particular, or anyone else?
Well, no, specifically, first you two
either of
guys.
my extinguished colleagues.
First you two guys. Do you have any color commentary about the early years, or questions you want them to clarify?
Well, a lot of what I want to say about the early years is in my experience of the early organization, rather than critiquing.
Feel free to hold the good stuff. Is there
Right,
anything
right,
that you guys would like to
Why don't we
say?
go through and let each of us talk, and then we'll all
That
see
would
if
be
there's
easier.
That
comments.
works for me too.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that will work better.
Just a wee bit of personal history as far as my early background or character coming into this. I was a fervent young man, I would say, involved in a number of causes, and went off and lived with Indians for a while, and then got involved in the environmental movement, ran around the country doing protests and various things, and always getting completely involved, no half doing anything. And one day in my Mother Earth News that was delivered to the house, I found a little ad in the back, just a little tiny thing that this man had put in there, or one of your delegates, I think it was you, that said, "Want a religion for intelligent nature worshippers? Send a Sazy too." that's all that was in there. And I was like, that sounds interesting. So I sent that off, and I got back a packet, a big envelope, and inside a number of copied early articles. I think there might have been, I know the study plan, I think maybe I had to send off for it, I don't remember. But I got this material and read through it, and it became the new thing, my new obsession. The vision that Isaac has been speaking of and that he had written about in those early articles, because I had, after coming out of the Native American community, was looking for my own, environmentally conscious, tribally based, close to the earth kind of spirituality, because I was very attracted to theirs, but I wasn't Native. And so that sent me through a search that led me through Norse paganism. They got me into Wicca for a number of years, a couple of different covens, and I was pretty disenchanted with a lot of it. And so that when I read the material from Isaac, I was like, okay, this is what I'm looking for, and was very much impressed by the vision of where he wanted to go.
What year was this?
88, 7?
Probably 87 you're doing that.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So soon after it kind of became formal, I didn't realize. I guess at that point I had thought, and I guess that had something to do with how things worked out for me. Is I did have the impression that the organization was more established and older than that, and so and particularly because the material that Isaac had written and especially the study program presented a face of ADF that was very confident and detailed and well envisioned and thought out, and it
Fooled you into thinking we had our act together.
exactly, and so I was a member and a reader for a number of years, and then when I finally moved up to Ann Arbor, I founded a grove there. Well, actually, first I went off to Wellspring one year when I finally moved back up north. I lived in the south, and I went to Wellspring, and I think that it had been after a while of maybe I had been sending letters asking questions, or I don't know what, but I'm sure that you must have been overwhelmed a number of times by the amount of correspondence that you get, because you ended up rolling it into a magazine for one thing. But I think I showed up at Wellspring with lots of questions, and everybody can look at me and said, "Who are you?" And I said who I was. I'm John Adelman, by the way. Generally people don't know that. Everybody knows me as Fox. But I left that Wellspring inspired to go home and start a grove, and I did, and threw myself completely into that, just like I've done everything else in my life. And before I knew it, it had grown and grown. So by the time I went back to the next Wellspring, it was definitely far more noticeable by the people in the leadership, because the grove had grown. And a few years after that, got up to 100 members. And I believe at that time I was directly leading a quarter of the organization, because it was about 400, And it was
100
just
members in one grove was the largest, and still is. We've never had a grove that
Right.
has been that big. Our largest grove right now is about 70 members.
right. And I don't know if there's anything particularly about me that had to do with that, other than just being so fervent. We met every day. It was everybody's houses. It was completely is what I did.
You met every day?
We met every day. Yeah, we had a calendar. We actually double booked a lot of days. We were just so busy, groves and groups. Guilds and groups, and it just became out of hand. Completely took over my life.
If you look in the dictionary under gung ho, you find his picture.
Right. So, but I also, I definitely experienced some frustrations, because I know certainly when I was Archdruid and in my struggling years of trying to manage the mess, I recognized folks like me coming along, who were very fired up and very interested but frustrated because of the things they couldn't get, or their expectations, or the organization that I thought was there, and it didn't quite perform in the way I had expected. So all of that was going on about the time that Isaac was health was failing, and I guess it came about by a phone call from you asking if I would be interested in assisting to administrate the organization. because he had seen what I had going on in Ann Arbor, and wanted to apply some of that organizational ability to the organization, and so created an administrator position called president at the time of ADF, and so then I applied the same attention and energy to ADF for a year as president, and basically started to get things organized. And that involved, you got to understand, back then there was no website. The Mother Grove met on a very haphazardly basis. Whenever you could manage
Telephone
service,
conference calls.
telephone
conference calls.
Yeah.
right. And so I set up, I started by, I don't know why I was on Prodigy at the time. We first tried a Prodigy chat sessions,
Yep.
and that was difficult. And then eventually we evolved as the web kind of improved and the resources that were there evolved into these sort of rolling, ongoing discussions that we now, I believe, still have. As much of the basis of actually how webmail works is that, somebody makes a comment and everybody gets a copy and everybody comments back, and, it's just that was just forming. So in any case, so what the effect of that was is that the Mother Grove started talking on a regular basis, and a whole lot of communication going on. And then at one point Isaac stepped down, and
How soon after email did Isaac step down?
Probably.
Email's been around a long time.
Right.
Well,
I was
Right.
trying to think. 95.
How soon after
I think, is my
ADF
earliest
embraced
email
it,
records going
and the Mother
back.
Grove started?
And you stepped down in 95.
At the end of '95, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it was
I had
January-
basically been
yeah,
doing
January
three
96
people's
when you stepped
jobs badly. By the time I realized I couldn't do it anymore, and I desperately needed somebody who looked like he had his act together.
well, and
And you rescued the organization. You really did.
well, it was a struggle. We didn't know how to manage this, and a lot of it was as I just started running things out of my house. We started republishing the magazine. I was trying to address a lot of complaints. There were complaints about the irregularity of Druids Progress coming out. And eventually it was decided that Druids Progress was discontinued, and we started Oak Leaves, and my wife at the time, Jaguar, and I pulled it together from a lot of material we got from different people and published that for a couple of years, I think. But a lot of it was just trying to get involved, see where I could help, see how we could get things organized. But at the same time, wanting very much to continue the vision that had attracted me in the first place. I'll readily admit that I didn't come in and say, well, this organization as it's envisioned is just about right, except I'd like to hack off this bit and replace it. It wasn't in my agenda at all. It was really trying to take what I had been fired up by Isaac's vision and try to enable it, try to help it deliver on the idea. Hopefully without stepping on too many of the toes of the way things were envisioned. Although I have to say that I think in the way that your vision had started to shape up was a lot more fluid and a lot more sort of unorchestrated, and would start dynamic the way things would go about. And as we grew, there was a need to impose a certain amount of order and structure. And I feel like in some ways that changed things a little. Some to the good, some to the bad. We tried some things that didn't work out so well or became too much of an encumbrance. But so we got the Mother Grove working on a very regular basis. We started bylawing to death. You were part of that.
Never-ending task.
Never-ending task of updating the bylaws. But a lot of the structure that's in place today was established, not at all just by me, but by this whole team of people that suddenly had their lives dominated by this email that was coming from the Mother Grove every day, filing in, and they needed to be on and active and responding. It was thousands of hours of work, debating. I guess one of the things I didn't mention was about the study program. I was very impressed by the study program, and that was one of the things that just completely sold me. So I got involved in that and applied the same kind of energy to that, and gave Dami O'Brien, who was running it, eventually had a file cabinet full of my writings and papers, and so I finally graduated from that and was ordained as a result.
Box is one of 4 people that graduated from the old study program, the original study program.
How long did it take you, Box?
couple of years.
How many hours a week?
I don't know.
This is the study program that meant to create a super druid.
Right.
Somebody with 13 different tracks
I
that
got a
could do
copy of it.
everything.
Super Druid study program.
Right, and what we mean by that, and it was something I was going to mention earlier, but I didn't want to make the mistake twice of interrupting your thought process, was that one of the things that study program had that I think is maybe still lacking, and I'm a little out of date of my knowledge, so please feel free to correct me, but part of what it had in mind was the whole administrative side. You were also a business manager and an accountant and an advertising agent and a public relations person and all these other things, that it seemed as if when we segmented up and I was part of that process of refiguring I was part of revision 2 of the study program, and it concentrated much more specifically on ritual and spiritual functions, and that whole the idea of the super druid, as far as I understood it, was that it was going to be someone that we could train and send off into the wilderness, and then without support they could evolve a community, and that's sort of
Well, it was more than that. Okay,
Yeah.
the original idea was to have a university without walls system, where for the first couple of years you would have to take general studies, just as in most modern colleges and universities. The freshmen and the sophomores all take more or less the same material, a little bit of everything, and then you declared a major. And if you were going to be clergy, you had to learn this, 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 and this. If you were going to be a counselor, you had to learn that, and some of this stuff over here too. And yeah, we did work in the idea that there would be specialties that people would be focused on. That no, we didn't expect you to, all of our graduates from it, to be able to do absolutely everything, but we expected them to be able to handle the basics of all the different things that a modern druid should know. But it was an enormous amount of work, and we had an administrative bottleneck that we couldn't get around. And we'll talk about the 100-year plan of ADF a little later, but I essentially handed ADF over to Fox just as it was becoming a teenager. So Fox got to guide the organization through the early teenage years.
it was a lot of work.
What we've done with the study program now is we've taken that where you learn everything and try to get it done, and we've broken that down into different programs. We start out with a Dedekind program, which is what we figure everybody that really wants to get involved in the organization will have a knowledge of how we do things, what our philosophy is. Learn a little bit about nature, learn a little bit about rituals, learn a little bit about divination. From there, if you're more academically inclined, you can go to the generalist study program, which is the academic backbone that's going to help you in any further studies. If you're more inclined in the magical divinatory skills, we have the initiates program that's going to concentrate on that. And where we've moved the administrative is into the third circle of the clergy training program, because we feel what we want to eventually work toward is to be able to have trained clergy that can go out into a city and create a grove there and work with that grove. So that's where we move the administration. All right.
Should we take 10?
Yes.
Sure, I'll try
Yes.
to remember where to pick up.
Okay. Take 10. We're going to exchange.